Mr. Winters, I just have a couple more questions before I go over to the NTSB. Are you now familiar with the Titan operations over the Titanic wreck site?
I am not. I guess all I can say is what I've read in the newspaper, but as far as any other thing,
If you were aware, or if you became aware as a marine inspector at Puget Sound, that an experimental vessel that was being built in your zone was going to be conducting dive operations over a wreck site with scientific personnel, and it was not inspected or examined by the Coast Guard, are there any actions available to the Coast Guard at that point?
I would
Mr.
start off by,
Okay, I'm sorry.
Can I just clarify, you're asking if this operation, maybe I missed this, was in international waters or if in the zone, in Puget Sound?
I'm sorry, I was talking about at the Titanic wreck site, so international waters. If I'm asking the witness if he became, hypothetically, if the Coast Guard became aware of an operation that was going to be experimental with scientific personnel in international waters, but was being constructed in their zone, I want to know what actions the Coast Guard could take in that instance.
Right, understood, but that was public information, the expeditions had been publicized, correct? So it's not really, was known. I mean, are you asking if there was a specific application made to the Coast Guard of some sort? Because I guess the confusion here is that this was known that these expeditions were taking place. So if you're asking, it's not a hypothetical, we can show the brochure.
Okay, let me rephrase. Is there an action that Sector Puget Sound could have taken with the knowledge that was known about the OceanGate operations to stop the operation?
it was not happening in our zone, so I think that would have to be referred to Coast Guard headquarters or the U.S. Attorney for what laws would actually apply. Because actually OCMI's actions are limited to what's in his AOR. So if the vessel was not located in Sector Puget Sound's AOR, our actions as far as what we could specifically apply to the vessel would be very limited. Not registered in international waters, I think we'd be outside of the scope of a sector doing something about that. That's my personal opinion. I don't know what regulatory wise, I couldn't speak to that.
But as a marine inspector, you're generally
Obviously, if I
understand.
became aware of something like that, I would have to run that through our investigations office for them to take the matter up to see what actions the Coast Guard could take as far as would be my reporting it to the investigations office for them to take up to see what we were going to apply or what actions we would take.
Does the Coast Guard have the authority to control a vessel in its zone, including under construction?
Under construction, I mean, if it were to be operated, you probably, if it didn't have anything, you'd probably have to go under the manifestly unsafe voyage or some other issue like that. Or is it a threat for pollution or some other thing where you use a captain port order or admin order? So it would definitely get down to the lawyers being involved pretty heavily in something like that.
Are you aware of, over your career, of a situation where you had to issue a captain of port order to a vessel under construction to prevent operations?
Not under construction. The ones that have been constructed that were operating without COIs or appropriately licensed credentialed mariners.
And to clarify, would that be operating in your zone?
Correct.
From your experience, would a vessel like the Titan be required to be registered or flagged by the United States?
So to be required to be documented, it must be 5 net tons and used commercially. So if it didn't meet the criteria for being documented, 5 net tons, then before we could give it an oceanographic research vessel letter or whatever, it have to be registered with the state. And that says of the rules that under 33 CFR 175, the state numbering system would have to be registered in the state.
Is it your understanding that a vessel like the Titan operating in international waters would need some type of registration or flag documentation?
That's outside of my area of expertise.
Okay, understand. At this time, I'd like to go to the National Transportation Safety Board.
Good morning, sir. I have a few follow-ups, and I apologize ahead of time for bouncing around a little bit.
That's no problem.
Along the lines of Mr. Neubauer's questions, if I were to take my otherwise uncertified, unclassed, but U.S.-built submersible and put it on a U.S. flag surface tender and launch it in international waters, what rules would I have to apply?
So obviously, if it's a U.S. registered vessel that's hauling around, the Coast Guard has vast jurisdictions depending on what their operations are. Is it certified to haul this vessel? Whatever it would, like I say, what are the operations? What is it certified to do? And then what's the nature of the operations? It could get down to where the OCMI could put a captain port order on the vessel hauling around not to leave port if they believe the operations weren't safe. It's Coast Guard's job is to protect people's lives. That's why we became an organization over 100 years ago.
So would the requirements in T or the NAVIC or the ORV rules apply only because I'm being launched from a U.S. flagged surface tender or a dive support vessel or a OSV?
So the rules, it would depend on, it's like I say.
I'm curious if the submersible has to meet U.S. regulations solely because it's launched from a U.S. flagged vessel.
It would, being launched from a U.S. vessel would not impact what the submersible would have to be inspected or ORV letter or a COI. That would go specifically to the submarine, not to the vessel launching it.
Would the submersible have to meet the surface tender's safety management certificate system, assuming it had one?
It would be, if it's inspected, then obviously we have the chase vessel requirements that are, if we look at it, I gave them a copy of the Atlantis, one of the Atlantis submersibles that's inspected about the chase vessel, people being involved, in divers being on that kind of stuff like that. If we're inspected, we would expect the chase vessel to provide the life-saving and some other stuff for the submersible.
Are the surface tenders inspected too? Are there requirements specifically for surface tenders, or what the IMO
have to
calls
meet
surface
some other
facilities?
criteria. If it was a freight vessel, it'd have to be over 15 gross tons. If it was oceanographic research, it'd have to be over 300 gross tons. So it depends on what specific category that surface vessel was either inspected to or operating under. So that would be a vessel-by-vessel case about what standards that would have to apply to that vessel.
A few people have testified that OceanGate would let the Coast Guard know whenever they were doing some sort of operations, whether it was for sea trials or an actual operation. What happens internally at the Coast Guard when that notification comes in?
So typically for Antipodes, when they were operating, they would notify VTS where and when they were going to be operating a dive. And then that VTS would communicate to the inspection department that Antipodes had a dive schedule, and did we want to participate in anything, whether we want to validate something. But technically, then through sector, there would be a notification that Antipodes would be operating, especially if you're operating near the traffic lanes, then it had a lot more attention paid to it if it was going to be operating near the traffic lanes.
Would the VTS operator know to check for a state registration?
I'm not aware of that. I don't know what their training or their watch standards would be they would look in missile, and if it's in missile with an ORV letter, I think they would probably be pretty close to the end of their investigation about if it had the proper paperwork to operate.
Is it correct to say that not all state registered vessels are going to show up in missile?
Not all state registered vessels are going to show up in missile. Only ones the Coast Guard's had an interaction with that we've actually entered the vessel in missile.
I understand you don't have missile in front of you, but do you know offhand if there's any marine casualties that didn't rise to the level of a major marine casualty? In other words, incidents that the Coast Guard would be aware of, specific to submersibles that the NTSB would not be aware of?
I'm not aware of any.
Can I be dual certified as an ORV and as a T-boat?
Say again?
Can I be dual certified as an ORV and as a T-boat?
No, because the U.S. Code says you must be operated exclusively as an oceanographic research vessel. If you have the letter and you're not going to do that, you have to turn, it says right on the letter, you have to turn the letter in. So it would have to be an unusual circumstance where you would have a dual as a passenger vessel, and that would go far above my pay grade for granting that.
Have you ever issued or come across a safety compliance certificate for passenger submersible craft that's issued in accordance with the IMO guidelines?
No, I have not.
I understand Atlantis was the impetus for the NAVIC. What was the push behind the IMO guidelines?
So obviously Atlantis started building submarines before the NAVIC, and those were built under the MTN 0496 policy. And then once the 593 came out, then the additional requirements were put on their COIs as far as following the NAVIC. So we have obviously submarines built to two different policies, one to 0496 MTM, the technical standard from the Marine Safety Center, and then the NAVIC came out in July of 93, which then we followed that policy. And up to the ones that were started were built before, then obviously that was both, that they graduated from the MTN to the NAVIC.
On a different topic, does the sector have a liaison officer with the local OSHA?
With
The local OSHA inspectors?
I'm not aware of any that are somebody's collateral duty may be, but I'm unaware of that.
Are you aware of any cross-training or joint inspections with OSHA?
Not with OSHA.
And my last question would be, I heard you say that Mr. Rush thought that the regulations were stifling innovation. Is that something you would concur with?
He said that on multiple occasions.
Would you concur with that?
And in what aspect?
The restrictions in the NAVIC are,
As far as that, he never attempted to circumvent any regulations or any requests or requirements that we were putting on OceanGate. There was never an attempt by OceanGate to circumvent any of those or not comply with.
are there specific provisions in the NAVIC that he was particularly upset with? Such the
The 1,000-foot, the 150-foot bottom was the major sticking point on the whole process.
okay. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Mr. Fawcett?
Yes, sir. Keith Fawcett, thank you for being here. So when you talked about Puget Sound, you talked about the vessel traffic service and the notification that the diving operations were going to take place. Is that correct?
Correct.
So was the notification to the inspections division only because there was a vessel traffic service there to get a report?
The policy letter about ORVs says that they should be reporting their operations to the VTS, and they were complying with that.
Do you know that the majority of the OCMI zones do not have vessel traffic services?
I'm aware of that.
Do you have knowledge that the Port of Boston in the OCMI zone of Sector Boston does not have a VTS?
I'm not specifically, I couldn't recite which ones do and which ones don't.
Thank you, sir.
Commander Welling? Lieutenant Commander Williams?
Does an ORV designation specific for submersibles require the submersible to be classed to a classification society's rules?
No.
If you had specific questions regarding the definition or interpretation of the definition of scientific research personnel or oceanographic research vessels, who would you reach out to?
CVC?
And can you define that, please? Is it commercial vessel
Yeah,
compliance?
correct, yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Commander Whelan?
Mr. Winters, you had stated that the Sector Puget Sound had issued oceanographic research vessel designation for the Cyclops 1 in 2018, 2020, and 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Were you aware of operations that happened in September 2020 out of the Port of New York to the Hudson Canyon?
No, I was not.
Thank you.
And sir, just to clarify for the record, when you said that OceanGate or Mr. Rush did not attempt to circumvent regulations in the timeframe, that was during the timeframe that you were working with him?
2010, when the process was going through with either the certification of subchapter T or oceanographic research.
Until what time?
My associated in August of 2010 ended with them actually physically interacting with OceanGate.
And sir, one additional hypothetical, and if you can't answer or don't know, just let me know, but if there was a foreign submersible being constructed in your zone, would you have any authority, inspections authority over that submersible?
I'm unaware of what that would be. I would say I'd have to reach out to the legal team of the Coast Guard to see what our jurisdictional authority would be.